Welcome to the studio. I'm Lindy Whitten and I'm going to be just doing a demo of a scene down the South Cape. We went for a walk the other day and it's just a magnificent beach, rocky coastline. It was a fabulous day. Really enjoyed myself. I took a whole bunch of photos and a few sketches, and now I want to do a pastel painting of it. So I'm going to walk you through the process of it, starting with how I make the design choice from the photos that I've taken. Okay, let's get on to the design. So the first thing I'm going to do after I've done all the cropping and working it out on there is just give myself a couple of little thumbnails here to remind me. I've sort of cropped it on the computer, but now I'm just going to take a Sharpie and just block in those areas, just as a bit of a reminder right next to me about what's happening, and thinking about the composition a little bit there, making sure that I'm happy with it. So that's all quite dark there. Just setting the values really simply. Behind it are some more sort of hills off into the distance. They're sort of blued off. This is lighter. I'm just going to swap over to a pencil here and just give that a little bit of a lighter mark through there. So I've got that receding. The sunlight's hitting that area there. This is quite dark, so I'm just really darkening that up. So I've got a few lights places along there, but most of it's dark. And then I've got some small area here of water and waves. It's just quite small, and then I've got a whole lot of darker areas along here, which are the rocks. So I'm just marking a small dark area there, and then another lighter area here. I'm just blocking in that where I want it to go. That's the general idea of it. I was playing around with whether I wanted that much, whether I wanted to actually come in a little bit closer. So I'm going to do a little bit of a close-up here, where I'm just focusing on those cliffs a bit more. And this is not what I was, it's really just cropping further the one I did on the computer, because I wasn't sure about it. I didn't really know which way I wanted to go, so now I'm just cropping that right in and seeing if I prefer that, because what I was really interested in was this foreground area here of seaweed and rocks, and I felt maybe I was losing it a bit there. So I've just cropped it in a little bit, and that'll give me those hills back there. And I've just pushed it in a bit further so that now all that seaweed is going to come, and rock areas are going to come right out there. I actually like this one more, so that's the one I'll be going with. And I'm just finishing up by checking and putting in a little bit of a line there to remind me that there's a whole lot of reflections coming down there that are quite dark. All this area through here is quite dark, so I'm just simplifying it now and making it one dark area there, the dark area there, lighter area there, and then it's the see-through there. So a lot of that is quite a light painting. Now I'm going to move on to choosing the paper. Why did I choose this paper colour? So I've chosen this paper because it's all very light there, and yet in this sand area I do want to have some sense of shadows and indentations in the sand, and this will give it to me. It will also help with the darks through there, and it's a brown, it's not a black, so it's still got a bit of warmth to it, and it will make the lighter colours really pop and stand out. So that's why I've gone for the darker colour. The paper is Carte. That's the paper I'm using, and I find that a beautiful paper to use. It's got a cork on it, so you can't do a wet underpainting on it, but it's very sympathetic, and I find the pastel really glides onto that. I'm going to start by just drawing in the main lines, and I'm going to use this ochre yellow, sort of ochre one, just because it's nice and easy to see. I want to go quite high up here in line with my little sketch that I did. So there's not going to be much sky in this one. So I'm just bringing that across there, and I'll have the background hills going up like that. I've got the main cliffy bit there. And this is a big rock called Elephant Rock here, and that's kind of in the sunshine. So I'm actually just going to give that a little bit of a just to remind me it's in the sunshine. And there's also some cliffy bits go back there in the sunshine. These are through here. I've got a little bit of the beach coming along here, quite tight in there. Then it's going to be, I'm just marking that area where I've got the seaweed and rocks coming back this way. I'm going to mark in where those dark shapes are now. They're quite dark, and I'm just using this reddy brown sort of colour. I'm trying to remind myself how high up that goes. I'm just vaguely blocking that in. I'm going to actually put some of this red up here, this dark red brown, up here, because it'll go underneath those greens and create a nice sort of contrast. So even though I can't do a wet underpainting, I can certainly do add a bit of it interest by underpainting with a harder pastel. So that's the green hills, the sunlit rocks. Now I'm going to just block in with a sort of just a bit of local colour there for those blue hills in the background, just to set them back behind this one. Not getting too worried about the actual shape at this point. It's really a bit high up there. It should be quite a lot lower. That's pretty easy to knock back. I'm just going to use some of the sky colour and knock that all back because I've gone too high there. So I'm just popping in some sky colour there. Might give it a little touch of yellow, lemony sort of yellow down there, right next to the blue hills. Just lighten off the bottom of the sky there. As I come across, I might actually give it a little bit of mauves in there as well. Just make that sky a little bit more interesting than just plain blues. Give it a little bit of a, maybe a little touch of aqua kind of colour in there as well, down near a greeny blue down near the horizon. It really slides on this really nicely, so I won't be doing any blending with my fingers. It'll all be just letting the pastels create the colour and the energy and the mixing. Let that be a little bit energetic. I've just taped it onto the board like so, so I can go right to the edge with this piece. It's lucky I've got carpet down there underneath it. I just dropped one of those. These are the Unisons I'm using at the moment, out of a half-stick box. That was gifted to me. How lovely was that, by someone who used to be one of my students, and he could no longer work with pastels in his new home. So he gifted me not only a box of 70 half sticks of Unison that had never been used, but a lovely box of Liz Haywood Sullivan's Skies and Water Terry Ludwig's. I mean, how lucky can a woman be? He said he wanted to go to someone who he knew they would bring joy to, and they absolutely do bring joy to me. So that is getting the sky in. I think it's maybe a wee bit too green there, so I'm going back to a bit of blue over the top of that. You can't really see much of that mauve I put in at the beginning, but it's just enough to give a little bit more interest to the sky. And you can see how just laying it on to give a little bit of movement into the sky, create a nice graded sky, because it was a pretty clear, lovely day when we did this walk, but without any finger blending at all. So that's pretty nice for the sky. I've got to remember that those colours do come down into the water and into the reflections too, so I'll be getting back to those in a moment. I've got that in. I'll think about whether that sky is exactly where I want it later on, but for the now I'm just going to take some of that sky colour and pop some of it in areas in here, because that's where the reflections are going to come. So I'm taking a few of those sky colours. I actually want a nice warmer, a bit of a brighter blue in there. I'm going to add a little bit of that into the sky as well. Just a wee bit. Brighter blue in there. So I'm adding a little bit of that in there. Some of these other mixes of blues. That brighter blue comes out into the reflections around this, just dotted in and amongst those little areas there. And it becomes a bit lighter as it comes further forward in the sand there. I'm going to pop in some of this hills back here now. I'm putting it in with a dark green. This is quite dark back here, so I'm actually going to go in with dark blue there to start off, getting the real depth that I want in that shadowed area there. Little bits of it behind the cliffies there, along that edge there. So I'm underlaying it with that, and I'll throw a bit of purple in. I like to keep my shadowed areas quite interesting, and I know it's a green hillside, but I want to add some more interest to it, so I'm just putting in some of those, and then I'll head back in with some of the greens again. A yellowy sort of golden green, a little bit of that. A brighter green around the tops here. And then my darker green. And what I really need to do is pull out a very dark green. So I'm just going to pause for a moment. The more purpley mauve colours. And then I'm just going to edge along there. So I've got the edge in there. Hills, this area here. I'm going to pop in a bit of colour on that now. It's a little bit more colour than there really was, but let's have a bit of colour, is my feeling with this one. So I'm putting in quite a bit of colour there, but I will knock it back because it is too much. So I'm just going to look for something that will knock it back a wee bit. Maybe just sort of keep a bit of the colour but not too much. So again, I'm just using the pastel to blend in those colours together. And I'm going to use a lighter version for these cliffs behind here, a sort of more yellowy, pinky version. It's quite light back in here. And some more around here. And then I'm just going to draw back in here, putting in a little bit of the sand as it comes around there. The background hills now need to just be worked slightly so that they're there but they're receding. So I'm going to work that in with some blues and some mauves. And just work them over each other. That's sort of the highest point about there, so I want to get that reasonably correct because it is somewhere specific. Often I don't worry, but I walk down here with my husband and I've been wanting to do it for a long time, so I want to get it fairly right. That might be knocked back a little bit too far, but I'm going to maybe go into it with something slightly darker. Not everywhere, just, and I might even darken up a bit more. So maybe just slightly darker. Grab that one. Isn't it funny how some pastels are so scratchy, even though they're from the same set? My students are always saying, oh, I thought you told me the Senneliers were really soft. This one's really hard. Yes, well, they do have different properties, the pigments, so some will be harder than others. I might just pop in a bit of this, grey it off slightly back there with this blue-grey. I just thought it was a wee bit too light. We'll leave that for now, and I just want to pop in a bit of the sea back there. Again, I'm just putting in a base layer. And we'll see, once I've got in some of the waves, that will knock that back a bit. It's a little bit too blue, but I will knock that back a bit. So I'm going to take a pale, sort of mauvey colour and just, it's not really, that's a bit too much. I want something that's just to suggest some lighter areas of the waves coming in. There'll be some darker bits going over it, and I will have that lighter colour going in now. There were just really monster waves. There were a couple of or half a dozen surfers out there who'd walked the 2 hours in with their surfboards tucked under their arms. Very dedicated. So now I'm getting a sense of the waves rolling in. I want to darken under some of those, but also have a sense of how, as they're going out, they're getting closer and closer together, and those waves were really crashing in. So through there, and we'll just put a few little bits coming in around the rocks there. So it's coming along. I want to reflect some of these colours down here. It's sort of all very organically. Of course, it's very organic. What a dumb, stupid thing to say. It's very. It was kind of rocky areas, but with lovely lots of soft seaweeds coming in as well. So I want to try and get that colour of the seaweeds, which is kind of an olivey, ochre-y green. So I'm using a mixture of greens and the yellow from back there, and kind of overlaying them a bit to suggest seaweed. I'll go in with a bit of this as well. I do want to keep the idea of those colours and just keep them working them through here. As I come forward, the rocky area, you can see more of the tops of the rocky areas. As I go back, they're becoming closer together like the waves, so you don't see so much of the individual tops. But here, you can actually see quite a lot. I'm getting in here again with some more of that greeny sort of colour, just doing some little flat areas there, in between and over the rocks, and little bits here. And then I need to go back into those rocks. I might do a little bit of drawing in here as well to sort of create some edges, some of the flat sections. And I'm going to go in quite dark again back in here with those dark browns to really block in those sections of rocks there. I'm reflecting them up here in some of these areas as well, along the edges of the rocks there. And using them to sort of, some of those marks to move us around the painting too, sort of zigzagging us back here towards this area back here. I'm going to take a few of these little dark, similar colour and pop them in on the rock as well, especially on that end part of it there. A little bit darker around the back there as well. I've kind of not emphasised how dark it is on that side of the rock, so I'm just doing that now with some little marks. I'm going to swathe in a bit of sand now, because it really needs it. So I'm looking for some light colours there for my sand. But I don't want it to be just one colour. Lighter back here where it's running along. Cliff edge there. Pull that up a little more into the... And there'll be some little hints of it here as well. But then it's going to darken up a little bit. So it won't be quite the same. It'll be a bit darker because it's where it's still a bit wet as the tide's been going out. And I'm pulling, you can see I'm pulling it back in these directions now to give us a bit more movement back here as well. I'm going to start putting in a little bit of mauve in a minute. This is where the background really comes into play because it helps to set those shadows in the sand, little divots where the sand's got some shadow in it. I'm going to use a bit of a mauvey colour there as well, pinky mauvey, greyed off kind of colour in there, where it's a little bit wetter, the sand. Pull some little bits back into there, just around the edge. And I'm going to layer that. It's not just going to stay as it is. I'll need to layer it with more, a whole range of those neutrally sort of sand colours, so that we get a little bit of interest going on there. As it gets back here, it's a little bit drier, so it'll be a little bit lighter and brighter. Sometimes you just have to think about it a bit. But that colour's not really in the photo, but I wanted to sort of bring a touch of it into here, which meant I wanted to bring a little bit more of it down here. It really helps you get that sense of sunlight on it as well. So, and it was quite sunny, so I'm just putting a little bit of colour through there. Not sure if I'll keep it or not. I might put a couple of little touches of it through this area as well. We'll see. Not 100% sure about that, but you know, make it up as you go along sometimes. You know, you think about it and then you try and stick to your value plan, but you can change the colours to sort of say what you want to say, really. I'm trying to get some movement going in and then back through there. I've got more of this happening here, the reflections. Now I've forgotten about this bit here where I needed to have some of that green of the hills coming down and being reflected in this area here. So I'm just pulling that out now, pulling it down. And there's some quite dark bits as well, so make some dark bits. Pull it down. And I'll add in the bits of water just to show that it's wet up here. I'm reflecting a bit of a sky down into it. Let's pull a little bit of that over the sand as well. Well, that's starting to come together quite well, I think. Now it's time just to stop and think about it for a moment. I'm adding in some little bits of sky reflections in the wet areas on these rocks. Because there's quite a lot of it. Of water through here, quite wet where it's been coming and going, the tide. So I want to get that in. Just working those greens a bit more off the hillside there, and I keep coming back to the very dark browns out here and then trying to run some of it through the edges. The sand needs a tiny overtone of some sort of, maybe more of that. I'm just changing the direction a bit so it's not, those diagonal marks aren't so pronounced in all the areas. I quite like this little warmy, almost caput mortem kind of colour. So I'm adding a bit of that in just to keep the foreground nice and warm. I'm not sure how much more I'm actually going to do to that. I think there might be some more variation out in the sea, so I might put in a little hint of a green out there as well. It was all just a bit too samey. So I'm adding in a little bit of different blues. To give that a little bit of contrast. I think this needs just a little bit of something else in it. I'm not really sure what. I think this needs a few touches of a few little brighter green touches in that as well. So I'll pull a little bit of that down into there. I think it's just not dark enough in there. Really, you need to just keep going back and forth and deciding what it is that's not quite right. I think there's a little touch of darker in there will help those reflections. And right now, I'm going to just knock that slightly back. I think that's slightly too bright, so I'm going to put a little bit of, it's just drawing my eye too much up there. And then I think the best thing to do with that now is to leave it for a while and come back to it at a later point and see if there's anything I want to change.